a swing back to the right,
Right.
towards more of a, I don't want to say nativism, but populism,
Populism,
definitely.
semi-authoritarian.
Semi-authoritarian, and just
The good
closing,
old
closing the
days.
borders.
Yeah.
Reminiscent on the good old days kind
Yeah.
of thing.
Yeah.
And that's that's in the U.S. That's
Right.
especially in Europe.
That's in Europe. It's in the U.S. It's
It's
in
everywhere.
China.
In
It's in
China.
Australia.
Yeah.
It's everywhere. It's not
Yeah.
in one locale who's immune
Yeah.
from it.
So where are you seeing, like,
Where's the sources of that?
No, I wouldn't say the sources, because I mean the sources is quite clear. Like it's the global tensions and the
Right.
migrations,
Right.
and just
The speed of change
the
and
speed
so
of change,
forth.
and then displaced people who
Yeah.
feel like we can't keep up to the
Right.
changes,
Right.
right? Or like and stuff like the tokenism, the
Yeah.
diversity
Right.
hires,
Right.
like
Right. Right.
making the local people like, oh, like my skill is just as good as theirs.
Right. Why is that person getting hired, not me?
Yeah, like no, this, or something like affirmative action.
Yeah.
Right. You have an SAT score of, I mean,
Let's just say you get perfect in your SAT.
yeah,
scores,
if you're an Asian, you get perfect on your SAT scores.
Right.
I mean, that's a lawsuit against Harvard right now.
Right.
And then if you're black and you don't get perfect, but you're able to get in over the Asians because of the affirmative action or the diversity, or you get the idea.
So this is a very big question, and here's the thing. I'm a firm believer that when we're born, it's a lottery where we're born. And where we're born sets our life chances. So if I was born in a very different community, I was socialized in a very different community, I would have very different life chances. I probably wouldn't end up the way I have ended up. So it is a natural lottery. What affirmative action is trying to recognize is that this lottery does exist. So if I am, I don't know, say Trinidadian, and I grew up in a very impoverished community in Toronto, and I am versus someone who came from a very wealthy, well-resourced community, and we have similar scores, I would like to think that because of that positionality from the starting point, we would want to try and encourage a Trinidadian to continue onwards. And the reasoning is not necessarily, it seems unfair on the surface level, if the choice is between one or the other.
Right.
But it does two things. One, you got to look at where the person's starting from and where they're going. So a 1600 based on one versus 1600 based on another is not equally the same.
Right.
Another way to think about this is long term. If we're looking at society at large, because we tend to be very individualistically oriented in our societies. But if we're looking at the community at large, we want to ensure that resources of other groups are increasing tremendously. When impoverished groups' resources increase, so if in our example, if this Trinidadian gets in and contributes back to their whole community, those resources increase. Everyone wins out as a society at large. Everyone wins out. And I think viewing it from that lens, if you're looking at it from a community's lens, it's to your advantage to ensure there's diverse, that you have a schooling system and a working system and employment that reflects the community.
So it sounds more like in terms of public policy.
Right.
It makes sense.
It makes sense from public policy.
You don't want any specific group to feel so displaced that they want to flip the system.
So, another thing I do look at is looking at conflict and ethnic violence. And ethnic violence generally occurs when there's a lack of meaningful access to institutions, so you don't feel like your voice is being heard, plus low SES, low socioeconomic scores. So when you have that combination, low SES and lack of institutional access, it increases potential for ethnic violence. Whether it's Canada or China or anywhere in the world, it's a very, very tried and true kind of formula. So we want to improve SES in our communities. We want to improve SES amongst all our communities. We want to make people feel as though they're part of the process in terms of our institutions, whether it's an authoritarian or a democratic institution. People want to feel as though their needs are being met. So in an authoritarian context, even though they don't have the vote, if their needs are being met, they're okay with that compact with the government at large.
This is all very macro, right?
Very macro.
Yeah, macro.
But it comes back to the individual. The individual does not actually see these macro forces. They don't see the societal forces.
So here's I'll drag it back.
Sure.
I'll drag it back down to the ground.
Sure.
If we're looking at inner city Toronto,
yes,
or like downtown Toronto,
right?
You have a kid, Vietnamese kid who came and their parents, work at a grocery store.
Right.
The kid, and the kid, has to even work the till, but they're trying to study at the same time.
Right.
They get really good grades. They get they do very well on their SAT because they want to apply to an American university. Versus a black person who grew up in a middle class neighborhood, and then they apply, and then the black person gets in because and essentially he has a lower score, but he still is able to get in over that student, that Vietnamese student who came from that kind of background. I mean, and she's penalized. He or she is penalized because of their ethnicity. I mean, at the individual level, that becomes very.
It's a very touchy and sensitive issue,
exactly,
obviously.
Right.
And both are in a terrible situation in terms of, from one standpoint, because it's when you have such few openings at elite institutions, you do need to. Figure out what kind of class do you want. So I can tell you from the professor's side, when I've been involved with admissions, for instance, I want to have an admissions class that's as diverse as possible.
You had admissions. You were in
both at Oxford. I did that at Oxford, and
for undergrads.
For graduates.
Yeah.
And I also did that in Melbourne as well. And in both contexts, you want to have a class that's not only representative of the society at large, but as diverse and different socioeconomic backgrounds, different ethnic groups, different gender balances, et cetera, et cetera. And it's a shame because you can, you have, say, 20,000 applicants and there's 1,000 slots available. I mean, for the most part, you really can't. I mean, you have such great candidates. Like you need to think about it. About who do you actually want? What kind of diversity do you want?